afternoon, and evening, depending on where you are in the world fighting our global pandemic, COVID-19. Thank you for joining us. I have on the screen now, there we go, a story about reusing PPE. And Jeff Sauter, who you see on the screen, and Roy Morgan, who you do not, he's going to get himself a webcam right after this broadcast, are in the business of sterilization, and we're going to be talking about how to reuse masks. Michelle Lott is a friend many of you know. She and I work together quite often, and she's going to tell us about new regulations around masks and try to decipher the indecipherable. That's her special gift. So Roy, let me have you introduce yourself, and when you're ready, I'll switch the controls over to you. I know you have a slide or two to help us understand some of the concepts you'll be discussing.
Sure. Thanks, Joe, and thanks everybody for today's webinar. I know it's well, obviously quite the topic in all the news, and so very important to the world over. My name is Roy Morgan. I'm the general manager at Eagle Medical, and we are a medical device services provider that does packaging, sterilization, assembly. More importantly, we have vertically integrated the hydrogen peroxide sterilization process into our business and have expertise in that. Relative to today's call, what I want to discuss are some ideas that dovetail with several efforts going on around the country and around the world to address the shortages of PPE that healthcare providers are experiencing. Just last night, I happened to be watching CNN, and one healthcare worker put it so eloquently in saying that what we can manage in the short term is shortages of PPE. What we can't manage is, if we don't fix that, shortages of healthcare workers. And I thought that very eloquently summed up the situation that we're facing. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about the current thinking that we're trying to address in this area.
Thank you, Roy. I'll just take a quick check. I typically do, but I failed to do so. I just wrote a note to everyone thanking them for joining in, and if you want to say hi and you can hear us and see us okay, we'll just make sure that all systems are go. Roy, may I go ahead and give you the controls?
Yeah.
Okay, let me make you a presenter.
Okay, let me call up the slide that I've got here and see, are you guys seeing the sort of trailer and ocean going container that we're showing here?
That's great, thank you.
Okay, so what we're showing here is a concept that I know is probably being thought of and replicated all over the country and probably all over the world. It's not a new concept, so we can't take any special credit for it. And I know we'll probably see a video in a little bit from Battelle that is also promulgating a similar way of thinking. Let me back up a couple of steps and explain how hydrogen peroxide can be a key benefit in this time of crisis. Recent paper published, I believe it was by a university in the Midwest, showing reuse of PPE up to 50 cycles with vaporized hydrogen peroxide is now in circulation. It is suggesting that it's possible to do this to help stem, at least in the short term, the shortage of PPE materials available to healthcare professionals. There's a couple of challenges with any kind of process to reuse personal protective equipment. And there are experts, I'm sure, out in our audience today who can add to this discussion. I am not a microbiologist, nor am I a virologist, but I have good levels of experience with sterilization processes, decontamination, and the validations thereof. So I'll ask that members of our audience help out to add commentary as we go along so that the general community can understand that there's some crucial steps and understandings that have to evolve in our community. Number one, there's a big difference between decontamination and sterilization. And there's a bigger difference between the validations of decontaminations and the validations of sterilization. They all involve product-specific validation protocols, particularly when it comes to chemical sterilization methods. Let me just spend a minute explaining why so everyone can understand. The chemical adsorption, AD, I'm sorry, Joe?
No, I'm bringing it down to the lowest common denominator. Define decontaminate and define sterilize.
Right. So decontamination is intended to essentially reduce the bioburden level to a level that is relatively safe for human contact. Okay. Sterilization is the complete eradication of all biologic material that's viable that can cause disease, right? In a nutshell. There's much more nuance to that, and experts in our audience can add more to it. But fundamentally, that's what you're doing between the two different processes. And right now, because we have such dire need and we have to respond quickly, there may not be enough time to get all the way to a sterility assurance level with the variety of products coming into the processes that we're talking about using, okay? And the process that we're talking about using, again, is this vaporized hydrogen peroxide, where we'll soak PPE in a container like the one you see on my screen, which is a converted ocean-going vessel container that's repurposed to act as a sterilization room. I believe this is a similar technique to that which Patel is trying to do currently. And Joe, I think you have a video queued up for later on that we'll look at that will show that, I think. Is that about right?
Jeff, do you have a video queued up? I don't.
No, I do not. Roy and Joe have a video.
Okay, so never mind. Then there is some work being done by Patel in this area as well. So we'll get a look at some of that stuff later on.
I'll have a chance when Michelle's speaking, we can do it in the background, see if we can't locate that, but please continue.
Okay, so by repurposing these containers into sterilization rooms, we can expose PPE to the vaporized hydrogen peroxide gas for a specified amount of time and all that sort of stuff to decontaminate that PPE. And let me back up a few steps because we don't want to give a false sense of security to everybody about what this process can do. We're just reducing base bioburden levels in PPE that's been previously used down to that which is relatively safe for human contact. It does not assure sterility. And the reason for that is that sterility assurances are highly product specific when it comes to chemical sterilizations. We have to determine what's called a base bioburden level, and that's usually done by examining in new devices the manufacturing environments, the people, the tools, the buildings, and all of the transport processes involved therein to understand how much accumulated bioburden, meaning just, the little buggies that get on the devices as they pass through the system in the means of production, and then assessing how much is there, and then determining if the sterilization methodology is sufficiently potent to eradicate it, okay? So that simple process, when you think about it, is very, very difficult to replicate in the dynamic environment of a hospital, where dependent on how much exposure a healthcare worker's PPE has to the variety of patients, whether they're SARS-CoV-2 infected or just normal flu or some other virus or illness condition, that bioburden level is all over the map. So establishing a base bioburden level for the PPE, that's really hard to do. Hence, what we're saying is the right step to take is to go for decontamination, to at least make the PPE safely usable by human beings in subsequent uses after they've been run through this process. Okay. So how do we do it? We can do this by repurposing ocean-going containers, obtaining VHP generators, piping the output of that hydrogen peroxide gas into this chamber up to a concentration of approximately 30%, allowing exposure for a fixed period of time, nominally 4 hours. After that soak state, essentially opening the fans and blowing out the residual peroxide into the atmosphere, where it will easily degrade into hydrogen and oxygen and water. What this does is 3 things that are crucial to the current state of the system. And let me explain some of the concerns that at least we here at Eagle have with what we were seeing in some of the community work that people are doing. Good intentions aside, many people are trying to locate sterilization centers where PPE can be sent to. I'm encouraging the community to pause for a moment and think about that. To date, the transport mail system has not been considered a vector of transmission for this disease. If we load it up with biohazard materials, we suddenly make it a potential vector for transmission of this disease. And so the answer clearly becomes one where local remedy has to be applied at the point of care, so that we don't introduce new biohazard conditions circulating in every mail truck, in every FedEx truck, in every UPS truck roaming around the country, right? We have to apply our solution here intelligently, and the local solution is the right way so that the spread of the disease is contained, much like we're trying to do with the stay-at-home orders, just making it so that people aren't vectors moving this disease around. We want to do the same thing with how we sterilize the PPE. Let's not put it into the delivery systems that we have going on around the country to prevent that from happening. The cycle is pretty simple. It's 6 steps, as you can see on the left. The idea would be to have healthcare workers who are already exposed and potentially at risk bring their own PPE out, load them onto racks for masks and a variety of other PPE that can be reused, load those into the chamber, commence the sterilization cycle, load the atmosphere in the chamber and soak it, run it through venting and aeration, and then opening the chamber, removing the racks, and making those available to the same or shift healthcare workers going in and out of the building. This is a solution that can be deployed on truck bed, as you see here, for deployment all over the country. Similarly, containers of this size can be deployed by the military on C-130s to locations anywhere in the world. The nice thing about it, as I'll show you here on this page, is that it's scalable. It doesn't have to be in an ocean-going container. Trucks of almost any size that have sealable beds can be converted to this kind of process. With the right sensors and monitors, we can keep the general population safe in the vicinity of these kinds of operations. And fortunately, because of the byproducts of how the hydrogen peroxide breaks down, there's low risk to the surrounding communities from an environmental perspective. All of those things should be monitored, nevertheless, and care should be taken when these technologies are deployed. So I'm going to pause there and kind of see what questions the audience may have.
I'm going to be your first audience, and as I shared earlier, I'd like to be the lowest common denominator, ask the easiest questions so that anyone who might want to jump on this completely understands what to do. So let me paraphrase what I think you said. First, you're from Eagle, but you've talked about Battelle. How are the 2 organizations related, if at all?
It's that Battelle has similar ideas like this that they're working on promulgating. So we're just taking cues and leads from other leaders in the research and development industry to come up with ideas, adding our own expertise to how this can be done, which is the hydrogen peroxide.
Okay. I think you said that they are a complementary company and you may be able to replicate their solution. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, because I have Ryan from Battelle on the line as well. I've been typing on the side trying to see what resources he has to lend. Ryan, I am going to elevate you to be a panelist in a moment. So on this page, again, I oversimplify. There's a great big blue box that I could buy or lease and keep on my property. Is that right?
That's right. These containers are called one-trip containers. They're essentially containers that have made a single voyage across an ocean on a container ship, and then they're put up for sale. They typically range in price from anywhere from about $2,000 to $4,000 for the container itself. So it's very low cost to obtain in the general sense, and is a highly portable, sealable environment that can be used for this kind of activity.
On page 2, you showed us 2 other, I believe, configurations. Is that
Yes,
right?
that's right.
And
So you
how
could
much do
use a
those
smaller,
cost?
yeah, you could use a smaller type moving truck and, you know, a trailered VHP generator in a similar approach for a smaller scale, perhaps a smaller healthcare institute or clinic.
Okay. Ryan, I have made you a panelist. Let's see if your mic works. See if I can double check on that. Yep, Ryan, your mic is lit. Nope, it says lit to me.
Well, while we're waiting on Ryan to figure that out,
Sure.
I do have a question. If we could revisit the concept of decontamination versus sterilization, what is the risk that remains to, you know, both the people loading and unloading the masks, and then the healthcare people that are actually using the mask, of just a level of decontamination versus sterility? I mean, are we?
Yeah, that's a crucial question. And unfortunately, I am not expert enough to answer it in any degree of detail. I would ask that expert members in our audience in the areas of virology, immunology, and microbiology chime in to help out there. The challenge, as I'm understanding it, is that the novel nature of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, meaning that it has mRNA in it that our bodies, human bodies, have no analog antibody or antigen to work with as a counterattack mechanism, means that it's difficult to say how we can neutralize this, although we suspect that it's fairly easy to kill. From some of the recent work coming out, and it's all happening so fast that it's hard to keep on top of. But I would suggest that we need a few more experts to weigh in on how we would be able to get an analog type of biological entity to use in performing these tests. For the audience that's not highly familiar with it, we generally use a Geobacillus stereothermophilus analog bacterium to perform the wide variety of sterility assurance tests that are performed out in industry. It's known to be a fairly difficult to kill bacterium, and is used as an analog to demonstrate sterility of devices that are put into new circulation as new sterile devices. So those kinds of tests have to evolve for us to be able to deal with you know, the reprocessing of these equipments and the determination of their decontamination and any subsequent sterility that we think we might want to try and assure. Again, I'll defer to experts that are smarter than I on those topics to weigh in and add more.
I just sent a link out to the whole audience. It is a free chat room I set up so we can continue the conversation between now and the next 164 hours before our next call. And where I'll make a special effort to extract what you just said to serve it up to the community as a question. Ryan, I believe we can now hear you. So close. James writes, masks are $5. Actually, I've heard there was as little as 50 cents, but I don't know. He writes, how much to clean each versus buying new? I think buying new is the problem because there isn't enough supply. And he writes, no guarantees on sterility. I'm not sure what he means. So Roy, can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think, you know, you're correct, Joe. The big challenge right now is that while the wheels of industry, so to speak, are spinning up to try and meet the demand, it's a lagging curve. And it unfortunately appears, at least in the New England corridor, you know, New York, New Jersey area, that's one of the hardest hit areas in the country right now, that getting that new supply into those areas is behind the disease curve, meaning that hospitals and healthcare workers that are wanting to swap out PPE, you know, between patient visits so as not to have the PPE itself be that vector of transmission, are finding that the shortages are fairly severe. You know, we're seeing it happen and being reported on in the news quite regularly these days. And I think that is the concern, is that new supply is behind the disease curve that's overwhelming the healthcare industry.
Roy, I'm just going to take a human moment here and compliment you. You have a great presentation style, very easy to listen to and understand, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Jeff, on the other hand, no, I'm only joking. Before I get to you, Michelle.
I love Jeff. Come on.
You work for Steritech. You're my go-to for sterilization. How do you work with Roy? How do your solutions complement what he's doing? Tell us about your piece of this puzzle.
Well, certainly, and thank you, Joe. Yes, my name is Jeff Sauter, and I'm with Steritech, and we are an E-beam X-ray sterilization facility based in the Fremont, San Francisco Bay Area. We're very fastly growing. We're building out new facilities throughout the United States. And yeah, so these are crisis times, and it requires measures beyond the scope of what has been performed previously. Certainly with N95 masks, these masks are intended to be single use only. So developing a robust system and determining the most effective way to decontaminate the product, which of course Roy had pointed out, we are not sterilizing, this would be decontamination. It requires a review of all methods available at hand to be able to process the product, to decontaminate them and basically with decontamination, you're getting the product to a level where you can assume that it's safe to use without risk of infection. Again, it's not a validated process. It's not sterilized. It cannot be considered sterilized. Now, and to the extent that Steritech is involved, we want to be a resource to the healthcare community. Now, with PPE material, indeed, with gowns and booties, gloves, coveralls that are used in the laboratory and healthcare environment, this product is typically sterilized with gamma, and now with Steritech more and more with E-beam. But this product, PPE material such as gowns, gloves, etc., this goes through a process through companies such as Cintas, Uniclean, Prudential, where they take product that is used within the lab or healthcare setting, and then they have a process where they're disinfecting or decontaminating the product to known bioburden levels based on empirical data. And then at that point, the product, such as gowns, gloves, caps, booties, they're sent to facilities with gamma, with Steritech, with E-beam, where the product is irradiated. Now here, the product can be validated as sterilized because it's going to a source where it's being cleaned or disinfected, and that source, that is the next step for measuring bioburden, and it's a controlled environment, and it's known to characterizable bioburden. So that could be a validated product. Now with N95 masks, these are coming from unknown sources of bioburden from different places, not from one place. So there's no way to validate the process, to Roy's point. So to the extent that Steritech is involved, we are working with a very well-known incubator in the San Francisco Bay Area for proving out the suitability of E-beam for the mask. Now, that is the most important measure in considering any sterilization method. Number one, the suitability of the material to the method that you are considering. So we are doing testing, we are doing R&D, and it's also in association with a healthcare organization out in the Northwest. But what we are doing is in preliminary stages. We cannot meet the need now. So with my association with Roy, a very well-known and highly esteemed individual in the field of hydrogen peroxide gas plasma sterilization, I know that he is the guy, the go-to guy in this field. So with what has been emerging with the modular systems, transportable systems to the healthcare environment or regionally, this is totally the way to go. So with the news with Battelle, I guess this system was approved to process 10,000 masks per day, but now the FDA has given it like totally increased, I don't know, 80,000 units or whatever. So they've totally taken the cap off the volumes that could be processed. This, as Roy had mentioned, the technology between what they do and with Battelle's system is similar. It would seem to me these modular systems are the way to go. And also Anura, who is part of the medical device group, was so kind to forward the email, which I had forwarded to Joe as well, with Underwriters Laboratories with ultraviolet rays. Now, with all of these methods, whether it's gas or irradiation, in essence, you're deactivating DNA or RNA of, in this case, the coronavirus, which is just a single strand of RNA. You're disrupting that so that these microorganisms cannot replicate.
Yep. And Jeff, it's Roy again. I'll add just another word about that validation process, if I could. And the people may be wondering, why is it that it has to be specific to a specific product, or material type? And the reason has to do with chemical interactions that the gas sterilant has with those products. Like any gas, air, or anything that comes in contact with a material, some of it gets soaked up by the material, some of it sits on the surface, and we count on both of those operations to be a part of that sterilization process, contacting the genetic material of the virus and disrupting it, right? So it's those two processes that are what, if effectively in a nutshell, in very simple terms, those chemotactic effects disrupt the virus. The difference is different materials soak up different amounts of the gas. And because of that, sometimes you need more gas because more gets soaked up than other materials actually do. So it's that variation that we have to manage. And that's why these validations are so specific to individual products.
Thank you both.
Thanks for pointing out, Roy.
I'm going to, you saw me kind of talking while I was on mute. I have gotten my Ryan workaround, and it's my cell phone. So I'm going to ask Ryan to mute his computer. I'm going to put him on speaker. And Ryan, you were sharing with me a number of Battelle links. I think you can put them up, and if you cannot, I'll put them up for you. But go ahead and address the audience. Okay. Thank you. And
so to give a little bit of background, the work that was shared previously from kind of a work view standpoint is pretty accurate as far as how this system works. To give a disclaimer, I'm not directly involved in this project, so I'm not going to be able to answer a whole lot of questions, but it sounds like the understanding of what we've been talking about here is in alignment with what it is. Not overly complicated, but it is based on some studies specifically on reprocessing, cleaning N95 masks, medical PPE equipment. It was done through work with FDA from in the 2014 to 2016 timeframe. And so if you go on the FDA's website, let's see if I can post this link. The report and exactly contents of the study is here. That's shared to everyone. Maybe Joe, you can post that.
Yeah, I will if I've got it in the wrong place. Not that. Looking all around my open windows. Please continue as I search for that.
So it was, this approach was done specifically for masks. Ideally, we'd like to extend it beyond masks. But given what we have and the proof group that we've been able to create, we're moving forward with this. So my understanding is we have 2 of these here in Columbus. We have 1 in New York City Metro. We have 1 in DC area. And I think there's 1 on a truck on the way to Seattle. We are making more, but I think we're somewhat limited on our own supply chain to have all the components for these things to put them together. But I believe we're building 2 more this week, kind of TBD where they're going. But rough numbers that I've heard are 80,000 per unit per day in quantities. Is that right? 80,000? I think that's right. 80,000 per unit per day. It's in the numbers on the Battelle website. So we're hoping to at least alleviate some of the shortcomings and volumes for some of the hospitals.
Ryan, you'll see on the screen, I was able to get your link up. I think this is what you were.
Yeah, perfect. So if you scroll to the bottom of that, it shows, you can actually pull up the report that Battelle put together for FDA as part of that contract. Yep. So everyone should be able to view that and read what the study contained, what the process was, what the data and proof set is for this process. You can see dwell times, you can see amount of time that it takes to aerate the units after they're done. Basically all the data is here. So we've received EUA approval to move forward with doing this in conjunction with hospitals or areas in need. I know my wife works at Children's Hospital here in Columbus, and they've been collecting masks over the last couple of weeks, basically to provide out to our center, just at least the center where these are installed, west of town, to be able to process them and then send them back. So they're excited because they're very, very short on masks. So any additional masks they can get, the healthcare providers are very thankful for it.
I have shared both of the links that I put on the screen with our audience. Is there another link that you've shared with me that I should pull up for you?
I think there was one other Battelle page. It looks like the NPR story. One other Battelle page that has more pictures of the internals. It's basically just racking. They're trying to stretch these out so they're all exposed to the vapor relatively evenly. Do you have another link, Joe?
Is it this one at the bottom? I showed the video a bit.
Scroll down to the bottom, it may be that one.
This?
Go scroll down, click on that orange box at the bottom.
This one? The newsroom?
Yes. Yeah, and I think that one has pictures and some video at the bottom if folks are interested. So to give a little bit of background about Battelle, we're a nonprofit research and development firm. We do medical device development. We do, I would say 90% of our work is with different government agencies, but we also do quite a bit of commercial work as well, doing med devices, doing diagnostics, research and development. It's a pretty flexible organization. It's a neat place to be because if I don't know the answer to something, I can get on the hall and usually find an expert to ask. So we have a BSL-3 lab just to the west of Columbus.
BSL?
Biosafety, please correct me if I'm wrong, biosafety level 3. So BSL-4 would be like the lab down in Atlanta.
Okay.
The government lab down in Atlanta, but BSL-3 would be kind of the next. We're allowed to handle some nasty bugs and neurological agents, things like that.
Okay.
So we did a lot of this work on decontaminating these masks out west of town. We're working with the COVID-3 virus, the COVID virus out in West Jefferson now. So hoping that more will come. But
my friend Tim asks, what are the technological problems in building the equipment? How can engineering companies like his help in designing equipment for this?
I would need to go phone a friend to figure out exactly what. My understanding is the supply chain. We can't get some parts to be able to build a few more. And I don't know the details about exactly what supply that is, but I can find out.
Is there anyone on the phone who knows that? You're welcome to type in an answer. Jeff or Roy, do you have any perspective on that?
Yep, I sure do. What's going to be needed is the hydrogen peroxide generator itself.
I'm sorry, Roy. Roy is speaking right now.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So what's going to be needed, Joe, is the hydrogen peroxide vapor generators themselves. There are several companies that make them. Obviously, Battelle probably does some of that too, and there are other companies out there that do as well. And in addition to that, there's going to need to be parts for piping that vaporized peroxide gas into the ocean-going container, some stainless steel work to provide a rotating nozzle that can disperse the gas very effectively throughout the room. And then the rest of it's really more just industrial process controls, simple programmable logic controllers that can drive valves, fans, actuators, swing arms, and doors, because it's about timing the amount of gas that gets injected, sensors that monitor the concentration in the room, and all of that's fed back into a simple PLC that says, start the gas injection, follow the concentration. When it hits the right level, stop, let it sit, keep the room airtight. When that soak time is done, start up the fans, pop the doors, pop the vents, let it aerate for a specific amount of time. And when that's over, shut down the process and give the operator a green light. You can open the doors and access the PPE. That's pretty much the process.
I just copy pasted Tim's question for everyone to read, and I'm going to share once again the link for our chat room, and I'm going to call it up here so you can see what it looks like. So I'm grateful to all of you who just joined. You can just see it's as easy as this, and we'll be able to talk with one another during the week, and that's the way that I can help kind of put the people who know with the people who need to know. So,
yeah.
Roy, I
Joe,
certainly hope that you'll jump on that as well.
Yeah,
let
me make one suggestion, and it's well, it may sound a little corny, but it's really a plea for humanity in this moment, which is these designs are known, and it's really those designs that need to be made public. They're not hard to do. They're fairly simple, but we need them to be posted in a place where distributed teams can get a hold of them and make the equipment to a standard set of specifications. If we can do that, then I think resources can be marshaled from all over the country to achieve this goal.
Well, I'll certainly share as widely as I can with the 350,000 members of the medical devices group. That's a healthy start, I hope. We've talked about EUA, and Michelle knows a great deal about that. And Michelle, if you don't mind, I'll turn the microphone over to you and your dogs.
Sure, yeah. They're right.
And would you like to be presented? Do you have any slides?
Not right now. I'll let you know if I want to screen share.
Okay.
So just quickly, an anecdotal story I was wanting to tell a few minutes ago that was relevant to something Roy had said, and then again to his plea just now for, the sake of humanity, making some of this IP and how to knowledge public, or at least shared within their community. A lot of the supply of masks, I have a client that is a practicing ER physician in the Atlanta area. He makes irrigation devices, but right now his hospital system is short of masks. So because he is a manufacturer of other types of products, he's trying to work his manufacturing relationships to see what kind of masks he's getting. So I'm working with him to understand the different levels of requirements for the EUA. But one thing that he mentioned, like that he was talking to some of the distribution partners for their system himself, and a problem is that and this is a really big name, I'm not going to call names, but this is one of the largest in the nation distributors of basic medical supplies like masks and gowns. And they told him that that part of the problem with the supply chain right now is, say that they used to pay $5 for a case of masks, it's wholesale. And I'm just making up numbers here. Well, now they're being charged between 10, 15, maybe even $20 a case from their suppliers. And their brand is such that if they were to buy these more expensive masks and pass them on at their normal margin to the hospitals, they would go up, that their brand would be tarnished by saying that by charging 2, 3, 4, 5 times more for a case of masks than they used to charge. And so rather than just paying whatever they need to do and taking a loss on distributing the product to save their brand, they have elected not to go out of business because of the cost issues. I'm just saying that's just a story from one person that's on the front lines of this, but it's a really interesting dynamic to consider with what could possibly be causing the supply shortages right now.
Thank you.
So for the emergency use authorization for masks, it is a very fluid environment that changes weekly, sometimes several times a week. And so it's been very difficult to kind of pin down, because as the virus epidemic is expanding, the FDA's regulation of these products is lowering. So where they started with the EAU opening restrictions in March the 2nd, by March 22nd, 24th, they published a new EUA, and that same day they published a guidance document that explains by intended use what the requirements are. And so in as little as 2.5 weeks, you had 3 changing requirements and lowering of the barriers to bring masks in. And these guidance documents are being written very feverishly, probably for somebody that is sleep deprived and either drinking or needs a drink. Regulations are already kind of difficult to navigate and understand, but what is happening with the EUA process, even for people who know how to interpret FDA, we have spent hours going in circles to figure out what did they really mean by that. So one thing I was thinking of considering investing some of my personal time in is to make when I started really understanding what the guidance document was trying to do, you can almost break it down into a decision-making flow chart. And so I've been thinking about spending personal time to create this flow chart so industry has a visual tool that they better understand what the requirements are. Because as the boundaries have been lowered, a lot of masks don't require any type of notification to the FDA at all. And it's basically a free-for-all for products that used to, some of them even require 510Ks. So what the FDA has done is sorted the masks by intended use and intended user population, and by the wording on your labeling. And if you can start the decision-making flow chart by, is this for general purpose? Like, is this just for you to say it covers your nose and mouth and hooks around your ears and that's about it? And the FDA said, hey, and N95 respirators that are for non-healthcare applications, they're like, hey, we never thought those were medical products in the first place, so we're still not going to regulate them. And then it moves up for, okay, what if you have a mask that's for a medical application, but it's not intended for liquid barrier? Well, that has a different set of requirements. Still very low, no notification to the FDA. I don't even believe you have to have design history files for those particular products. And then you start layering on mask features from there. Well, what if it is for a healthcare population, but it doesn't have, but it does have liquid barrier, but it's not a respirator, and it doesn't have an antiviral coating on it. And so from there, you just start adding product features to kind of move up the requirements barriers for the EUA process. And so, you know, the decision chart would clearly show when you went down a path that's not going to be restricted by the FDA during the EUA. And then as you start adding product features, what requirements are added, and when do you also have to add in a communication to the agency? So, and you know, back to my point about how rapidly this is changing, when the EUA process for masks first opened up at the start of March, there was a special email that you had to address to request an expedited pathway for FDA to review any 510Ks you wanted to submit during this time. Well, now the EUA has lowered the boundaries so much that some of the requests we put in the first and second week of March have come back, and the FDA has said things like, we do not intend to approve any devices through an expedited pathway because the EUA requirements have been lowered so much that it's no longer necessary to have an expedited review. The FDA and the CDC has also lowered expectations, because masks used to be called, you know, for surgical masks. They're like, okay, maybe we don't need masks that are necessarily appropriate to go to surgery with. We just need a barrier of some kind. And so now they're starting to define sub-indications within a population of masks that used to be overarching, and you had to meet the requirements, you know, regardless if it was going into surgery or you were just going to stand at a patient's bedside.
Michelle, I heard you say that masks are now binary according to FDA. There's N95, where you have to comply with rules, and a free-for-all. Did I capture it?
No, not at all.
Good.
But that's where we get back to the
where
flow chart. Why we need so many channels in the flow chart. It's like playing Plinko on The Price is Right. You know, you put your token in, and you know, there's about a dozen different ways that chip could go down and fall. And so it's more important now to understand your intended use, the intended patient population, subpopulation, sub-intended uses or indications, labeling, and whatever labeling you put on your product has to be consistent with what the FDA has specified in that EUA process.
I can't help but think about last week when we talked to Jess and George at the senior center, and they're making their own masks out of cloth. It's just so far from what you're talking about. Like, I just need some protection.
Well, it's
And there's this
scary right now because
conversation about where's that line as it relates to regulating all of this. We need something.
well, and I think it was just today, you know, and this is where it's a great debate amongst the world's leading healthcare communities. Like China and Korea said, hey, US, you've got it all wrong about masks. Some mask is better than no mask. And look how we've been able to manage every outbreak that comes through Asia by just wearing some kind of mask. But, and then
I just put that on the screen. You can see here, it's a site called masksavelives.org. And I think that the main concept here is not so much how you are protecting yourself as it is not infecting people if you are asymptomatic and spreading it.
Mm-hmm. And then
I think that's the main takeaway.
The next day after China and Korea came out with this data, WHO basically debunked it and said, no, we still need some quality and performance standards. And then I heard, and I haven't looked this up for myself yet, that CDC came out with a statement similar to what you're showing now, that some mask is better than no mask. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that, after all this is over, how this data shakes out for the US. And if we've really created, my personal concern is that we're going to create placebos that make us feel better as a society and make us feel more confident in going out, but really have done nothing about the spread or prevention of the disease, and actually might have made us more confident in our feeling that we're not going to spread or catch. So it could be totally a placebo effect that all we do here is make ourselves feel better.
I don't know that I come to the same conclusion. I mean, again, I recognize this is one data point and who said otherwise, but it seems logical to me that if I'm covering my mouth, even with a scarf, and I cough, I'm less likely to project that within 6 feet of myself.
And that's where people don't really understand how many requirements and test standards exist, product performance criteria exist for masks depending on your claims. So what you're just talking about would be a liquid barrier claim. Well, there is a mask guideline. You have to be a class 1 and 2. You have to pass class 1 and 2 flammability requirements to say you have liquid barrier. So we're back to, you know, at least we need to understand, if you're going to use a bandana, what is cotton's ability to really prevent, to meet these liquid barrier requirements?
As a person who specializes in telling stories, that's a lot to communicate to a mass population.
And it's a lot of science too. And you know, the mass of society aren't scientists. And we're inundated with science that even the scientists don't really understand right now.
Tell us, and I want to be somewhat conscious of time. As you know, typically I let my calls go over, but given the nature of this and how busy everyone is, in our last 10 minutes or so, yesterday you shared with me some of the documents coming out of FDA. Perhaps you can call them up and we can share the links broadly.
Sure.
May I give you the screen?
Yep. Let me. Hold on. I'm shutting down some messaging things so we're not inundated, because I'm getting, like, I think I told you this, my customers that are stuck at home are like emailing me, and then they call me or text me and say, did you see my email?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm starting to get overwhelmed today. All right.
So go ahead and take that link and throw it into the chat box or send it to me however you want, and I'll be sure to distribute it.
Yep. How do I get to the chat box?
You can throw it to me in Slack.
Got it. So here's the mask guidance. There's the link to the mask guidance. And and this is another curious thing, you know, the FDA isn't even dating the draft guidances. So if they were to update this, it's like almost every time you need it, you don't need to like keep it on your computer. You need to go back directly to the FDA hyperlink for the guidance, because you can't even tell what date it was published, you know. And that's another reason why you have to, like, you know, as regulatory professionals, we have to watch like a hawk all the notifications coming out from the FDA to make sure that we're working on the most up-to-date information. So this is what I'm talking about with the decision-making flowchart. And if you think, if the industry people on the call think that this flowchart I'm talking about would be helpful, please comment and affirm that in the chat box, because it is going to take me some resources that I'm very thin on to do this. But so here's where we start. You know, you have face masks and respirators not intended for a medical purpose that have one set of requirements. Oh, but wait, if you're a respirator, even if you're not intended for a medical purpose, there is a subset of different requirements for N95. Then we start adding in, again, technological features are that they are for a medical purpose, but they're not for liquid barrier. Then it explains what the product requirements are, what the test requirements are, if they are any, and what the notification to the FDA. Now, and we just start crawling up the food chain with product functionality and the, so look now, when you're talking about how effective is a bandana, because what I heard you say is that people feel like it's giving them some sort of liquid barrier protection. Well, if you want to actually make a liquid barrier protection claim for the masks, this is all of the requirements, including testing. So there's an ASTM standard and a CFR standard for class 1 or 2 flammability that you have to do on the test before the mask before you can make that claim, even though you don't have to tell the FDA ahead of time under this EUA.
And Michelle, can I add one comment to that?
Sure.
That is that it's important for people to remember that masks, by virtue of how humans breathe, work in 2 directions, inflow and outflow. And I think if I remember the text of this standard, specifically that liquid vapor barrier is for inhalation, not necessarily exhalation.
That's a great point. So, and so it's back to what are we wanting, what are we believing that the masks are accomplished? So if what you just said, then that will keep you safe from them coming in, but it's not necessarily going to keep people safe from you breathing out.
Right.
Michelle, in the interest of time, I'll ask you again to go ahead and give me that link. I'm going to take the screen back. I got a question from Andy Christensen. I'm sharing it with the whole audience, including a link.
I did put the link in the chat box, Joe.
Thank you. And he specifically asked if Roy would talk to this. Let me see if I can. I'm putting you on the spot here. Advanced sterilization.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly.
Processing.
Right. We're expert with the Sterilize 200 GMP machines. We operate 12 of those here in continuous operation at Eagle Medical. So we're very familiar with this technology. The 100NX is a particular machine that uses a higher concentration of hydrogen peroxide in its cycle. Our machines use 59% concentration. The 100 NX, if my memory serves correctly, and I'm sure the audience will point out if I'm not, I believe it hyper concentrates 59% up to 90 in a internal distillation column, and then injects that into the process. So it is a much higher concentration of hydrogen peroxide. As you can see in this photo that's on the screen, its chamber is fairly small size. It's meant for small scale reprocessing in hospitals of endoscopes, duodenoscopes, instruments, tools of that nature. So it's fairly small batch size. And the problem that we're challenged with globally right now is mass scale reprocessing on an order that I'll just say it's big. Okay, I think people get that. So these chambers, while helpful, can handle volume loads for, say, a small surgery center or clinic, but not necessarily for that of a large hospital or healthcare center.
You can see I just changed the screen here. David Snyder provided this link. First ever mobile UV system certification for large scale disinfection. Quick thoughts on that, if any?
So with any modality of decontamination, and I don't want to say I know much about the UV's effects, we have to consider the effects on material degradation. The N95 masks, there have been some references out there in the literature that the electrostatic charges of the propylene nonwoven materials, that are used have partial bacteriostatic effect. It's unknown, I guess is what I'll say, whether UV accelerates degradation of those properties or not. And it's crucial for us to think through degradations of performance that methodologies can incur per use. And they may be cumulative or they may be off a cliff, if you know what I mean. So those are important features to consider when you're evaluating the modality of sterilization.
Let me quickly ask a question or two as we wrap. Carlos asks, can you recycle masks in an emergency situation by placing them in the microwave oven for 30 seconds?
Oh, wow. I don't have enough knowledge of that method to say if it would be effective at all or not. I'm sorry.
Okay. Ian asks, let's see, would CDC or other COVID-19 test developers be able to directly help validate COVID-19 specific efforts? Does it take longer for off-gassing? Are there different off-gassing requirements or specs for N95 masks versus other types of PPE? From Ian Sass. Maybe too much to absorb if you're a reader as I am. So I'll put this in the question box. I'll just write from Ian Sass, and if we're unable to, oops, I sent that to just Fred by mistake. Pardon me, Fred. There. From Ian Sass, if we're unable to. Let me ask. We have almost everyone who started on the call still on the call. I want to give folks once again this link for our chat room, and my job is to help facilitate those conversations. So you can ask me a question and I can forward it on to someone. I'm also compiling a directory of everyone who chooses to join us there so that you can reach one another directly. Again, it's just people raising their hands saying that they are looking to help, be involved, have an idea, and as best we can, I'll kind of be a clearinghouse for that. Another is I'll give you a form I got from Sarah McGregor. She's coordinating the medical device group's COVID-19 response team, and she put together that form for intake for people to say kind of what they are doing. If you're on the call and you were on last week and you emailed me or LinkedIn me, I'm sorry I haven't gotten back to everyone. I'm pleased with the enthusiasm and unpleased with my ability to not be an artificial intelligent machine that can handle everything at once. With that, I'll give you this link, which is the one that you used to sign up for today. Unfortunately, I don't have a way to sign up everyone for next week. If you want to do it each week until I figure out something better, that's the way to do it. Closing thoughts. Roy, is there something, understanding how diverse our audience is, and I can't even tell you what the composition is. You can say hi to the world if you want, Lucas, but other than that, this is a, what?
You can't mute yourself.
No, son, I'm talking right now. Oh. Just say hi. There's Lucas, everyone. He's home from.
Hey, hi, Lucas. How you doing? You know, I think, Joe, in this moment of crisis, I come back to the human components of compassion, of innovation, and creativity. We are a remarkable species in these ways. And I guess I just want to say that I'm grateful to you and to this community for creating this forum where we can get our best thinkers together so that we can plot a course to solution. I'm hopeful that we'll find ways to involve government agencies of the right scale that can help fund these efforts, because I know they're not free, they're not cheap, and while they're not necessarily very difficult, it takes teams of people to put these things together and to deploy them. So, how we go about getting there, I don't know. I'm thinking Army Corps of Engineers, I'm thinking Seabees, I'm thinking large industrial partnerships that are formed ad hoc to put them together, but they all have to revolve around a known design that's functional. And if we can get that out there, then that is something that can make a big dent here. And I'll just leave us with that thought.
With you completely. Jeff, any?
Oh, I couldn't say it any better than Roy, so I'll leave it there.
Well, let me be a bit more administrative here. Fill in this sentence. Folks on the call should call Jeff if.
Well, if there's any sterilization requirements where we can help with E-beam X-ray technology, we're serving the healthcare community currently. We're processing a tremendous amount of diagnostic products for the COVID-19 crisis. We're working with amazing people and developing technologies to help relieve the symptoms of COVID-19. And we want to be of full support to the healthcare community. Again, we are doing R&D with the masks, and Roy had pointed out, and as well as Michelle, such important points with material characteristics. With the vapor barrier, you have to have aerosol tests, aerosol filtration tests. You can't go about this haphazardly. So it has to be a controlled process with people in the know and with materials made available, which may take resources, including, as Roy had cited, with the having the government involved and having foundations like Battelle Institute involved with this effort. Pulling together in this wartime type of environment, we can make this happen. It's extremely unfortunate that there is a shortage of N95 masks, and the real question is, why is there a shortage? If it's not only
we'll
for
let
private
that go. That's a bigger question than we're going to be able to answer today. Roy, finish the sentence. People should contact Roy if
you want to learn more about hydrogen peroxide gas plasma sterilization and about ideas around how this solution can be implemented. Battelle is another great contact to look into how we can get designs like this out that can be made available in times of crisis, in centers of crisis where they're needed.
And Fred Montague has written me twice about hydrogen peroxide, saying that H2O2 has no toxic off-gassing like ETO2, only water as a byproduct, and says that, is everyone aware of Battelle's N95 sterilizer FDA just approved? We talked about that. It uses H2O2 and can sterilize 80,000 masks per day, and each mask can be sterilized 20 times before discarding. So thank you for that, Fred. People should call Michelle if
you have products that are eligible for the emergency use authorization or new technologies that might not even fit within a current authorization. I'm working on masks, ventilators, and COVID-19 IVD tests. Basically all the products that have EUAs right now.
Okay, and last, I will say people should not call Joe Hage. Instead, they should hit me on chat, which last time, here's that link. That is far and away the most efficient way to reach me and to have me redirect you to the best resource I know how. A sincere thanks for everyone joining us today. This is an important topic. I even went straight for an entire hour, and I didn't pet Elliot because this is serious. So for me, Michelle, oh, hey, Ryan, you still there on the phone? Let's see. You there?
Yes.
Oh, okay. People should call Ryan if.
If you have questions about our technology, I'll do some calls about seeing how much we can open up our design to other folks. I think I received a question regarding what was restricted in our supply chain as well for producing these chambers.
Okay, so Ryan is with Battelle, and he joins our chat room. You can reach him directly, or you can reach him through me. Think of me as a liaison for industry, and I'll do my best. Once again, for me, everyone on the call, Roy and Jeff, Michelle, Ryan, and I know Sarah's out there listening, and she's helping coordinate these efforts. A very sincere thank you. I will make this link available for replay and as a podcast. Until next week, or until later today when we chat in the chat room. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.